Hey everybody, welcome to a very special episode of Word Slingers. We've got our special guest, Ray Ramos.
What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for having me, Ben. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, no problem, man. It's a pleasure to have you here, especially on today of all days, October 1st. We are kicking off October right.
Hell yes, man. I love it. I love spooky season. I mean, for me, it's always spooky season, but October has that special, like everyone comes together kind of thing, like Christmas and
Yeah,
Thanksgiving. Yeah,
it's
all
time
the
for
freaks come out.
bonfires and dressing up. And Oliver says, Yo, what's going
There
on,
he
Ollie?
is. Good to see all over. Thank you so much for joining us, Oli. He's not with his comic geekies.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Do they have that show on tonight?
Yeah, I think they usually start like at 7, but once Aerith starts talking, like you can't shut them up, so they just keep going and going and going.
It's awesome. Yeah, I've watched a few episodes there. They're pretty funny.
Mm.
Marcus Lauer killing it with the background band. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I wanted it to feel like Halloween.
I know I'm like very lackluster. I got nothing but toys behind me, so it's like
Awesome. Well, hey, we are here to talk about writing horror comics, and that is something that you do.
yes, sir.
All right, so let's tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started writing.
Man, I've told this story a few times, and Oli's always like, nah, 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 you know. But when I was a kid, like my parents were from Mexico, so they would only speak Spanish to me growing up, and it wasn't until I went to elementary school, in the first grade and like in kindergarten, that I started learning English, and my parents immediately put a stop to me learning Spanish. They were like, "Okay, listen, you can't speak both." That's what they told me. You can't speak both. You
Hmm.
got to learn English and you got to master it because that's the way you're gonna get ahead in the world. So don't worry about Spanish. Just learn what you can in school, and be the best you can or do the best you can as far as learning the English language. So I'm like, okay, no problem. But at the same time, they'd still speak to me in Spanish at home. So it was like, what's going on? Um, but yeah, so all through elementary school, I loved reading. I learned how to, speak English very well, and poetry was a big draw to me. And that
Hmm.
was like my thing. Like I love my jam. I love poetry. Anything that has to do with poetry. Romanticism, the beats, anything at all. Shel
Yeah.
Silverstein and even Rod McEwen to a point. And I was just into poetry, and I just love the way that poetry always painted these pictures with very few words. It was all
Yeah.
metaphor and it was all alliteration and stuff like that. So that's what did it for me. And just learning the English language, learning how to read poetry and interpreting it, led me to a life of just reading and literature. It was my gateway, right?
That's awesome.
And it just went on from there. And it wasn't until middle school I was going to our middle school. It was right down the street from where we lived, and it was after school, and I was walking home, and I looked in the trash can, and there was a comic book sitting there in the trash. And I remember it was I think it was Amazing 252. It was the symbiote Spider-Man fighting the regular Spider-Man suit, and Peter Parker's in the middle, and he's like struggling with both of them.
Okay.
I found that in the trash and I'm like, what's this?
Wow.
And I started looking at it and I was like fascinated by comics, and you know what? Wow, this is awesome. And I started getting into comics and stuff. And then, kept going from there. I got into X-Men. The first comic that I ever bought was X-Men 242. It was the Inferno issue where Wolverine is kissing Jean Grey on the first page. And I was all into it. I was all in. But what really changed me was Faust, when I
Oh,
first discovered Faust, because that was what I wanted to do as far as literature was concerned. It's true, I plagiarized work
yeah.
in 10th grade. I wrote that paper, by the way, so just so you know, I wrote his paper in the 10th grade.
So
But
you earned two A's with that. Yeah.
there you go. And the way that David Quinn would write Faust was very poetic, and at the
Yeah.
same time, the art that accompanied it was beautiful, but it was like this gore fest. I mean, I'm sure you've read some of Faust, some of Vigil's stuff, and that was like, wow, you can do this with comics rather than like what Sylvester was doing in the X-Men. This is
Right.
even better. So I just started consuming anything indie, anything that was
Mm.
like different from the mainstream. I mean, I still stayed with the mainstream, but anything indie, anything from like obscure writers and artists and stuff, and that led me
Yeah.
down that road. And finally, when I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to do my own comics. It was about I was about a sophomore, if I remember correctly. I was a sophomore, and I wanted to do my own comics. And there was my friend David Olivares. I met him in my math class, in my algebra class, and he sat right in front of me. And I saw him drawing, and I knew who he was because we had come up together. He was at the same elementary school that I was at, but he was a year younger than me. And I saw him drawing, and I'm like, "Hey, man, you draw? That's cool. I want to do comics." He's like, "Oh, I love drawing comics," and I'm all like, "So, do you want to draw my comic?" He's like, "I'll draw your comic if you can get me a girlfriend." So now he's divorced. But at
And
the
he blames
time,
you.
yeah, pretty much at the time it seemed like a good idea. But we did do books together, and we kind of formed our own group in high school, and we started doing training on books. And this was around the time that Hall of Heroes was very active. And we heard about these guys, Trent Kanuga and Van Sciver, these guys that were doing comics on their own right out of high school, and we're like, man, we can do that. And at the same time, Image was starting up too, and we're like, man, we can do that too. So we took it upon ourselves to do comics in El Paso on our own, outside the mainstream. We weren't trying to get hired by the mainstream. We just wanted to do our own thing.
Right.
And that was like, wow, you can't do that. You gotta, go through the whole, enlistment process or whatever you want to call it to get into comics. But growing up, we were always very adamant about doing our own thing. But the thing that always like drew us together was that we had this fascination with the darker stuff, and we
Mm.
loved, like when the X Men, like Inferno, for example, that was very dark. Back in the day, like the X Men fighting like demons and stuff like that, and my friend David was also into that, and we wanted to do something along those lines. So we started writing these comic books, and they had that tinge of horror or the tinge of supernatural and the occult and stuff. And we just took off from there. And my writing kind of reflected that because I always wanted to have that little bit of horror or supernatural stuff in anything that I wrote,
Yeah.
even though it was superhero comics at first.
Awesome. So what was the first comic book that you self-published that you sent off to the printer?
Well, see, that's another thing too. Um, David's dad was a printer.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it was like built in, right? No,
Right.
it was awesome at first, but then once we got into the nitty gritty, because we asked him like, "Hey, if we do a book, will you print it for us?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So we did a book. We decided to do this one character called the Dark Vigil. It was a resurrected cop, but it was in the future. Long story short, it was in the future. The apocalypse had happened. People lived in underground cities, and there was like society in the underground cities, and one of them was a cop. One of the guys was a cop in on this police force that took care of these cities, and he gets murdered, and accidentally he gets resurrected, and he's trying to find out who his killers were and who killed his wife and all this other stuff. And we managed to get the first issue together, and we went back to David's dad, and we're like, "Hey, we want to print now." He's like, "Great, come here. This is how a printer works," and he showed us the machines, how
Yeah.
to do the ink, how to pick the paper, how to buy the stock, and the weight and what type of ink to buy. And it was funny because we had to learn like the nuts and bolts of everything, and this is before internet. So
Right.
we actually sat there and dismantled a comic book to see how it worked,
Yeah.
and figured out how the sheet or how the pages would fall and how we had to print everything. And oh my god, dude, it was an undertaking. Like I can honestly say, like comic books, like writing
Yeah.
is the easy part. When it comes to printing,
Yeah.
that's the hard part, man, because we were like knee deep in ink and like
I
doing everything that
bet.
we had to do to produce our book because we wanted to have it in our own hands. And it was very rewarding,
I
because I
bet.
don't
Yeah.
think a lot of writers now, or rather creators in general, can
Yeah.
have that appreciation of how a book really does come together.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's an awesome education to have at such a young age.
Oh yeah, big time,
Yeah.
man, big time. And then I mean, during that time, I was like, ah, man, just work, whatever. You just want to do a book.
Right.
But now I kind of regret it because I really wish we could have done more. Then we ended up doing about 3 issues through Dave's dad, and that's because we were lazy, and we were all about the hype and stuff. And oh, thank you so much, Jasnor. Um,
Yeah.
but if we had really buckled down, I think we could have rivaled. We could have gone to the point where we rivaled a lot of the indie
Yeah.
publishers of the time, but we didn't. We were just, we were just out of high school. We were like 17, 18 and stuff. So we're like, ah, man. So
No Googles. No
no
Googles.
Googles. There was no Google, sir.
That's awesome, man. So, do you have a process like how you sit down and start to break a story?
um, yeah, it's kind of weird, man. Like I'll start watching something or I'll start reading something, and then I'll be like, how does that work? So I start doing the research on it, and take little notes here and there and stuff like that, and then just I go straight into the script like raw. I don't a lot of I don't know how your process is, but a lot of writers that I know, they do like bullet points or some sort of what is it called? I forgot the word for it,
Like a
but
beat sheet?
yeah, exactly. Like they do that, and
Yeah.
I just go straight into it. I was like, okay, page one, 4 panels, I think, and panel one, and then I start describing panel one, and it just forms from there. And the Cryptidnals were written that way, actually. Like I just
Really?
went page by page. I had an idea where I wanted to go, and I just had to
Yeah.
fill in the in between because the ending I already knew how it was going to end, or rather the first arc. So I just had to get there and fill in all the
Right.
in between. But yeah, and some of my co-creators, my the 6x6ers, they're like, well, you need to write something down, man. You can't just go raw into it and stuff. And I'm like, and that's another thing too. I don't know how you work, but I have to have chaos around me. I have to have
Yeah.
a movie on. I have to have music on. I have to have like stuff that's trying to distract me, but at the same
Yeah.
time, for some reason, I find like this nirvana in it
Really?
in
That's
order to
interesting.
produce. Yeah, it's weird because I don't know if you know Julius Freeman,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
his stuff. Like he like trips out because I would tell him how I would write, and he's like, "Dude, I need to be quiet, and I need to concentrate, and this and that." And I'm like, "Wow, that's weird. That's weird to me." What is your
Yeah.
process? I'm curious about your process.
Me, I do like music. Like I can't do it without music. I need like that mood set in my head,
Hmm.
and then in my head, like I picture what's happening as the music's playing, like it's a score for a movie,
Oh, nice.
and then I just start writing from there.
A lot of what I wrote for the Cryptonals was based off of a lot of music, a lot of pieces.
Yeah.
Like I'm really into like Silver Sun pickups and stuff like
Hmm.
that, and I would listen to that a lot. A lot of like Metro, a lot of weird, indie stuff,
Yeah.
um, and that's how I got into it. So yeah, music is like a key to me as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I don't think I could do it with a movie on in the background. I think that would distract me. But music, like,
Well, you know what it was? Familiar, something familiar. Like I'll put
I
on like
gotcha.
the Thing or something, or Big Trouble in Little China or something, and something that's
Yeah.
comforting. But I know what's going on if I look up, like, oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
cool, and just keep going.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's a
I,
matter of being in control of your environment.
mm,
I think that's what it is. Like, you know what's happening around you, so you don't have to worry about the external, and now you can concentrate on the internal and what's
there you
going on.
go.
I think
You
that's what it
know,
is.
not only that, but like my wife gets pissed a lot because like at night I need to have something on. Like I can't go to bed without having like the TV on. It has to stay on, or like the Alexa has to be playing music or a light on or something. But I think that comes more from childhood trauma through all the crap that I've seen growing
Yeah.
up, because that's another part of it too. I mean, a lot of what I write is based off of experience. A lot of like really weird stuff that happened to me growing up, and that's another reason that I write horror, because it's kind of like a cathartic process to try
Yeah.
and make sense of the things that I've seen growing up, because I had no explanation for the stuff that I experienced. And
Yeah.
not only that, but doing the research into the stuff that I think I witnessed or that I remember seeing, it opens up all these doors, and you can't help but want to do something with that, rather than just let it sit in your mind and just
Right.
cook.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, it's Halloween time, so
Yes, exactly.
let's talk about some weird stuff. Oh, wait, hold on a
Oh
second.
man,
Got another comment. I really enjoy Silver Sun pickups and the thing. A Big Trouble in Little China. What a cool dude. Yeah,
thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Very, very cool.
that's my brother there.
Oh, thank
Just
you.
so yeah. Tell me a story, man. What's one of the weirdest things that you've seen?
Dude, I've seen a lot of weird stuff. La Llorona story is always the one that I lead with and stuff. I've told this story a few times, but it still creeps me out because it wasn't until recently. I mean, in the last few years, that I started putting the pieces together as to what was going on behind the scenes. Because when it first happened to me, I was just some dumb kid. And
Yeah.
just if you need to stop me, because I know I start, like my wife says, I start rambling and stuff. But when I was a kid, I was about 13. My sister lived out in the boonies of El Paso. I don't know if you've ever been to El Paso or not.
I never have.
No. Well, it during that time, like there was the central El Paso, and then everything like outside of El Paso was the considered the boonies. And there's this tiny little community called Moon City, and it's
Hmm.
like down this one street called Socorro. You'll hit it, and it was a little tiny community. And back then, there was this one amusement park called Magic Landing. A lot of people have talked about Magic Landing. A lot of stuff happened there as well. They ended up closing it down because there was an accident with a kid that like supposedly got decapitated. All this craziness that
Wow.
happened there. If you Google it, you'll find out that information. But that's like a whole other thing. And I remember going to visit her, and she lived with her in-laws. So back then in that area, a lot of people would build their houses, and my brother-in-law was a carpenter. He had learned from his dad. His dad was also a carpenter, and they had built the house that they lived in. And in the garage area they had left, it was a perfect square, if you can imagine. So the main house, it was a one floor, and it was at the end of the block. After that, there was nothing but cotton fields, and there was an irrigation canal that ran behind the house. If you looked across the cotton fields, there was like a cliff, and up on top of the cliff, you could see the Ferris wheel that belonged to Magic Landing.
Hmm.
So it was maybe like a mile away, but you could see it from her house. And I remember going to visit her and always tripping out on the way that my brother-in-law had built their house out of the garage. So when you would drive up into their driveway, immediately there was a big oak door in front of what used to be the garage that was now their house, and it had cinder blocks all over it. So it was thick. That door was like super, super thick. And whenever anyone drove up at night, because I had visited them a few times, you could see the lights come in through the cinder block and underneath the door. But I mean, you could tell it was a vehicle, it was a car. So
Right.
as soon as you walked in, and you got to remember, it was a perfect square. As soon as you walked in, immediately to the left there was another door to go outside into the backyard, and that's where the dogs were. In front of you, there was like their little living room area. There's two couches, a TV, and then off to the side there was a tiny hallway where there was the kitchen. And if you went through the kitchen to the back, that's the master bedroom and the bathroom, and that's where she and her husband lived, my brother-in-law, and the kids. They had kids also. Um, so I would go visit them a few times. And this one time when I was 13, my brother-in-law went to visit me at my house, and he tells me, "Hey, Raymond," and he was kind of like a hippie type guy, biker type guy. And he was like, "Hey, Raymond," and I remember him saying, "Hey, you want to come over to the house this weekend? I got a satellite dish, and if you want, well, we can watch the Playboy channel." And that's an age gauge right there, man. I'll tell you how old I am, because back then you had to wait to a certain time of night in order to position the satellite so you could get like the channels. And I was like 13. I'm like, yeah, 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 awesome, awesome. Yeah, I'll go. So I went to go check it out. Hey, Los Garcias, what's up? What's up?
Hey, thanks for
Um,
watching.
Thank you so much. So my sister told my parents. My parents were cool with it. I went to go spend the weekend with them, and I got there, during the day, and we just went during the day, like to the surrounding area. Went to like some supermarket, got pizzas, blah blah blah. Went back to the apartment, hung out. My brother-in-law was drinking his quart. My sister made dinner. She went to bed with the kids, and I stayed in the living room with my brother-in-law. And around midnight, that's when he's like, "All right, it's time," So he switched the or whatever he did with the satellite dish, and he like aimed it, and we started watching the Playboy channels. Like, oh my god, it's like boobies, awesome. Somewhere along, around maybe 1 or 2 o'clock, I passed out. I fell asleep. I don't know how much longer he was awake, but all of a sudden, I hear knocking at the door, and I wake up, and it's loud, like banging on that big oak door, like boom, 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 boom. I'm like, what the hell? So I sit up and I'm looking. I didn't see him at first. I didn't know he was there, because to me he wasn't. I thought that it was him outside that had got locked out.
Hmm.
So I sat up, and when I sat up, the dogs in the backyard were barking. They were going crazy, and the door was open because it was like towards the end of summer, and they would still leave the door open. They didn't have very good air conditioning.
Yeah.
and there was the cool air was coming in. The dogs were barking. The door was knocking. I got up. I went to the door. I was about to open it. I had my hand on the handle, and my brother-in-law sits up from the couch, and he's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Hold on, Raymond, don't open the door. It's La Llorona. If you open the door, she's gonna come in here and take us all." And I'm looking at him, and I have my hand on the door on the handle, and I'm
Yeah.
looking at him like, "What the hell are you even saying, man?" And the pounding continues, and the dogs are still barking, and that's when it started. This whatever it was, I say it was La Llorona, because I never saw it. I just heard it. Starts wailing, and it's like I can't even describe how it was screaming, like in despair. It's just really hard to describe. But the one thing, and every time I tell this story, man, I get like this feeling like, oh, the
Yeah.
one thing that really stuck with me was when it took a breath, because it would scream and then it would pause and you could hear it go like that. And
Yeah.
it actually sounded like someone trying to breathe underwater. And it scared the living crap out of me. And the
Yeah.
dogs were no longer barking. And I realized that everything was quiet except for this thing going, screaming, like right behind that door. And I had this compulsion to open the door. I needed to see what was there. My brother-in-law was like trying to talk me down, like, come and sit down on the couch, get away from the door. My sister comes out of the back room, and she's standing like in the little hallway where the kitchen is, and she's looking, and she's like, come sit down. It's happening again. Come sit down. And I'm like, what? It's happening again? What are you talking about? What the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
So finally, I managed to like pry myself away from the door, and it seemed like forever. But honestly, maybe it was like maybe a minute or two at the most. And I went and I sat down on the couch, and this thing kept going, and finally, it kind of like stopped. And when it stopped, this bright light, I can only compare it to sunlight, came in underneath the door through the cracks in the cinder blocks, and it illuminated the room. And we were like, what the hell? And I was looking at them, and they were just sitting there like in silence. And then the light like dimmed, like real weird. And as soon as it dimmed, the dog started barking again. Everything seemed to come back like into reality. Everything was normal. And I looked at them and I'm like, what the hell was that? And
Yeah.
they're like, it's La Llorona. And I'm like, what's going on? I had so many questions. I didn't know. I wanted to know what was going on, what it was. Had they seen it? Blah, blah, blah. My sister's like, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it in the morning. Just go to sleep. I'm like, how can you go to sleep after you've experienced
Exactly.
something like that, man? Like, there's
Yeah.
no way. And my brother-in-law like sat up. He finished his quart. He turned on the TV. And I just like lied there, like just staring at the door. And I was like, what the fuck was that? I'm sorry. Oh, what the hell was that, man? I didn't understand what had happened.
Yeah.
The next morning, I asked my sister, what was that? What happened? And she told me, it's La Llorona. And she left it at that. She's like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. That's what it was. What? How can you just leave me hanging like that? And that troubled me, man. That like really like got on my
Yeah.
nerves. But see, now in retrospect, I'm thinking, I've been finding out a lot of stuff. My sister has passed away. My dad passed away. My brother passed away.
Sorry.
After that happened, no, it's okay. After that happened, it something seemed to follow me back home, and I started having a lot of experiences at my house. I would hear kind of the same thing, but more like toned down. Like I would hear crying outside. I would hear chains like being dragged outside my window. And it wasn't like a constant thing. It would happen like, a month would pass and then I'd see something or I'd witness something. Um,
Yeah.
but there seemed to be like this dread that fell over the house. And
Mm.
between the ages of 13 till about, till about 19, there was just so much chaos at my house. My parents, um, they were like just jerks to each other. My mom especially, like she had a lot of issues, and there's more stories that are concerned with my mother, but we're just telling this one for now. um you, yep,
Never
never
heard this
heard
part
this
before.
part before. So I started realizing, I need to find out. I need to have information because obviously I didn't get it from my sister.
Right.
So I started doing research around the area that she lived in, all this stuff, and I think that's what started opening doors for me as far as writing was concerned, stuff like that, because that's the only way I could express myself. Because nobody would listen to me, nobody would pay attention, nobody would believe
Right.
me. Even though the stuff that would happen in my house, my parents were witness to. Even though friends would come over and see things as well, no, I would never get any validation from anyone. And I was talking to Brian Christal. He writes Six Gun Gorilla about this, and he was telling me like, dude, you talk about this so freely, and you're not afraid to like talk about it, because most people would be like, no, I don't want to be judged, I don't want to be called crazy and stuff. And I'm like,
Right.
I mean, you can call me that, that's no problem, but it did happen. I did see this stuff. And like one of the main things that would happen at the house after that was like the shadow people, this negativity, this negative energy. I
Yeah.
would see shadow people left and right everywhere inside the house. My parents would be walking down the hall, and you would see like the shadow person like following them right behind them. You would see things in the corner, and it was weird, man. Like my mother would yell at them sometimes, and there was this one, and I always tell this story also. There was this one shadow person, and I don't know if it was considered a shadow person, but it was like negative. Like whenever you see someone standing against a blackboard, you can see the halo around them, like a little
Yeah.
outline. If
Yeah.
you like look hard enough, that's what it looked like, just the outline. Like it was white, and it was just the outline. And it would, stand in the corners of the house, and it would trip me out because if you really stared, you could see it. And if you like looked away a little bit, like on your peripheral, it wasn't there. But if you like looked, you would see it if you really concentrated.
Yeah.
And this one time, I remember my mom had, I guess, had enough, and she started yelling at it. And she's all like, "Get out of my house!" And she was singing in Spanish, like, "Salte de mi casa. Si
Yeah.
eres mala, salte de mi casa. Si eres buena, quédate. If you're evil, get the hell out. If you're good, you
Right.
can stay." And I remember this thing, and we had paneling. Like, which Mexican family didn't have paneling back in the 80s, right? In the 90s and stuff.
Right.
And I remember we had paneling, and the thing kind of receded into the paneling. And it took, like, the shape was in the paneling. It was weird.
Huh.
And up until a few years ago, before they took the paneling down, I could still point it out, like, where it was.
Wow. Yeah.
And my dad would see shadow people, my mom, and I always attributed it to how my parents would react to each other. There was a lot
Hmm.
of negativity between them. My mom had this constant like negative attitude towards my dad, and she would go out of the way to be an a-hole to him,
Yeah.
and my dad would like just kind of just roll with it, but at the same time he would like drink, and classic Mexican family dysfunctional.
Right.
So I started like doing research as far as what was going on during that time. Um, Not research so much as in books, but like asking questions, trying to figure out what the hell had happened. And it turns out, and I found this out a few years ago, right before my sister passed away. I found out that her and my brother-in-law were into some stuff. They were doing
Hmm.
stuff out there, and when I started like delving into that, I started remembering certain things that I had witnessed that didn't really click in my head until years later. Like there was always people out in those fields, and there was a lot of like dead animals in the area. A lot of stuff was happening in my area. It was during kind of like the Satanic Panics
Yeah.
time, and my sister was into some stuff, and I remember reading the Necronomicon and the Satanic Bible at her house, at that house. And I remember her having like objects, fetishes, stuff like that. Copal, sage, things like start making sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. Whatever was going on there, or part of it, whatever was going on there, kind of attached itself to me,
Yeah.
and I
The,
brought it
the,
home with me.
the hitchhiker effect.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was so open to the idea that it was so easy for it to just, yeah, let's hit you right. Let's see what happens.
Right.
And it started affecting like my parents, started affecting my mother. Like I said, the negative energy. I would see a lot of things around the house, and I remember also like the shadow people thing. I would go and look in the backyard sometimes, and you would see them back there like late at night, because I had really bad insomnia. I mean, which writer doesn't, right? And I would stay up late at night, and I would write, and I had my little word processor, and I write poetry, shitty poetry, and all that other stuff. And I'd take walks. I'd take off. I'd leave the house. I'd go walk around the block, and like my house was so close to the border that I could throw a rock and probably hit Mexico. That's how close I was. And so I would walk, and I'd get pulled over by La Migra. Like, they'd stop me in the middle of the night, like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm just walking," and I'd speak better English than they did, and they were like, "Whoa, what the hell's going on?" But I remember going to the backyard and like looking sometimes, and you would see these things like just kind of congregating in the backyard, and I compare it to like a swarm of sharks. I don't know if you've ever seen like sharks when they swarm.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would fly around, and they would swarm, and they would be walking around like hovering above the ground, and I would see it, and I'm like, "What the hell?" And I panicked. I would go back inside, and I'd be like, "No, fuck, I don't want anything to do with that." And all that stuff started coming into focus. And I remember my graduation. I remember seeing my sister at my graduation and asking her, like, "Hey, all those years ago, what was that? What happened? What did I see? What did we witness?" And she told me it was La Llorona. And she told me that she had seen La Llorona in the backyard, because there was an irrigation como puedo- there was an irrigation canal back there, and the back room where she was living at. You're jumping a fence. Not quite, sir. The irrigation canal was like right up against the house almost, and she could look into the backyard or into the through the back window and see it. And she said that one time she looked in the back, and there was this woman standing there, all dressed in dirty white, the classic La Llorona image that you get, but that
Right.
she didn't have a veil. She was just dirty, and that her eyes were bloodshot red, and she had like rows underneath, like she hadn't slept, like they were all blackened, and she was just like walking around the backyard, and she saw her, and they made eye contact, and that she was like scary. But when she went outside to look, there was no one there.
Mm.
So all this stuff started coming into play, and I started realizing like my family was into some stuff that I never realized because I was a dumb kid just doing whatever. um my mom started getting into like the occult. She wouldn't really like come out and say it. She got into like santeria during that
Mm.
time. um she was trying to like, and I've talked to like santeros, and they've explained to me like what she was trying to do. She was pretty much trying to like bind my father to her.
Mm.
And I don't know if that was like part of the reason she was so crappy to him. But I would find stuff around the house. I remember one time I found like a little fetish doll made out of my dad's underwear in like a crack in the wall, and I pulled it out, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" Luckily they were clean, but still I was
Right.
like, "What?" And I like tore it apart, and I threw it, and that's what messed me up also. Um, Another story, since we're talking about stories, I've told this one also before. This one time, I was at the house. I was about 17, and I had just started driving. And any chance I would get, I would ask for the car. I really wanted to drive the car around. And one time, I remember it was like a Saturday, and it was the afternoon, and my mom called me over, and she was in the back room, and she's like, "Raimundo, come here." Raimundo, oh crap, I'm in trouble. So I went back there, and she's like, "Look outside the window, and there's a bag." And she told me in Spanish, but there's
Yeah.
a bag outside. And I looked, and there was a blue Walmart bag. Back in the day, I don't know if you remember the
I
blue
do remember
Walmart bag.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a blue Walmart bag in the corner, and she's like, "Don't ask me questions. Just do what I tell you. Go get that bag and whatever's in it. Don't look inside. Get a can, put it in the can, take it somewhere where there's running water, like a canal or something, burn it, and then throw whatever's in there in the water. That's what you need to do. But don't look in the bag." Well, yeah, yeah, whatever. I get to drive the car, right? And she's like, "Yeah, take the car." So I'm like, "Hell yeah." So I went in the backyard, disregarded everything she told me, man. And I went straight to the bag. I got a stick because I could smell it. As soon as
Yeah.
I walked up to the bag, I could smell it. And I get a stick, and I look in the bag, and there's a raven, like this huge raven in there. And it had a red ribbon around its neck, like it had been strangled because its little tongue was like hanging out. And I'm like, "What the hell?" And it had like this blue liquid in there. It was weird. It was really weird looking. And I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever, man." So I took the bag. I got a coffee can. I took that, and I put it in the car. And I was driving around, and I'm thinking to myself, whatever, man. I'm 17. What do I care? I got the car. So
Right.
I took that stuff, and I tossed it in a dumpster somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, cool." And I got to use the car for the rest of the evening, and I was like all happy, whatever. So yeah, I messed up big time right there because I didn't do what I was told. and I was talking to a santero recently. Actually, I had never had any sort of like, um, I guess, context for the story as far as what had happened or my
Right.
experience. And I was talking to a santero, and he told me straight out, like, "Yeah, you messed up bad, bro. Like, honestly, you should have done exactly what your mom told you to do, and you didn't. And whatever she was into, that stuck to you now." And it's been stuck to you since that time because you didn't listen and you didn't do what you're supposed to do. So, according to what he told me, um, something like that is apparently a spell or some sort of like what is it called?
Like a
Ah man,
hex or a
like a
curse?
hex. Thank you. Exactly,
Yeah.
it's a hex to try and kill a witch.
Oh wow.
To try and kill a witch, or to try like to like mess up to destroy a witch. And by doing what I did, whatever hex was being sent to my mother, I guess, came over to me instead because I just disregarded and threw that thing away. So I'm like, oh great, that's great. And it's interesting also because that santero, he told me like, yeah, you need a cleansing, you need a limpia. I'll do the limpia for you. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, I need you to go home tonight and crack an egg. And he told me what to do, like, and put it in water, and then send me pictures, and I'll tell you, what's going on. And I did it, and I never heard from him again. And to this day, I keep texting him, and he won't respond to me. And I'm like,
Uh
oh, great, man. Like, what the hell? So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on with other stories, but stuff like that, man, stuff like that has led me to a life of like just trying to cope with it and cope with it
oh.
through
Right.
writing. And poetry, comics, anything that I could possibly do.
Yeah. No, me and my brother, I grew up in South Texas as well, but not in El
Oh,
Paso. I grew up in Edinburgh, Texas.
oh, okay, I know where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that neighborhood where I lived, there was so many weird things going on. Like I feel like my brother and I talk about all the time now. You've heard of Skinwalker Ranch, right?
Oh yes.
There's like all this weird paranormal stuff happening there.
Hmm.
Like my brother and I talk about how this street that we were living on, like there was ghosts, there was lights, there was shadow people, there was duendes,
Oh,
just
those
weird.
duendes. Oh my god, man, those. Oh, you said that, and I got chills with the duendes, man.
Yeah, we saw and experienced and heard like all types of things on that street. It was crazy. It's weird how that's like in South Texas. Like I think there's lots of witchcraft in that area. I think because of Mexico,
Oh, big
that
time.
a lot of people practice that over on that side.
Oh yeah, man, like big time. And that's the thing that I started finding out. My mom was into some stuff. Obviously, my sister was into some stuff, and I was oblivious to it, even though it was right in front of me. Yeah, I didn't connect the dots.
A lot of trauma
A
down
lot of
south. Yeah, for
Nah,
sure.
it's true, man. And I mean, how do we cope with that? Like we have to
Right.
some way, drinking. I don't know, that's too expensive, and it messes you up. No, let's try writing. Let's write it out and
There
stuff
you
like
go.
that.
We'll share that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man.
Yeah, that's Skinwalker. Hold on a second. Another. Oh yeah, my brother says Lechusas too. Yeah, that's true.
Oh, las lechuzas. I remember that one too, man. I remember one time I had gotten a BB gun. I think I was about 14. I had a BB gun and I was shooting at, birds and shooting at cans and stuff around the house. And I remember I came out one time into, the driveway area, and I had my BB gun, and I was planning on going to the backyard and shoot. And I turned to go into the backyard, and there was a pigeon sitting on the wall. So I'm like, oh man, perfect. So I took the BB gun and I aimed it at the pigeon's head, and I looked at it. I looked at it like directly in the head. And what does he say? Skin Ranch is a
Skinwalker
trip
Ranch
to
is a trip too. Yeah.
pretty much, man. That's gonna come out in the Cryptidnals also. We're gonna do a story about that.
That place
Skinwalker
has
Ranch.
everything. That's Skinwalker
Yes, have you
Ranch.
seen the series? My God,
Yeah.
man! Like I
Yeah.
just people get sick just by going there, and the giant like animals and all this, like werewolves and
Yeah.
skinwalkers and everything. But anyway, I digress. So I had the pigeon's head like in my sights, and I remember pulling the trigger. I remember seeing feathers, and the pigeon fell over on the side of the wall, right? And I was like, "All right, cool." And I was gonna go around because it fell into the neighbor's yard, and I was gonna go around and see if I could find it. I just didn't want to leave it there and have the neighbor get pissed. So I turned to go around the wall, like down the driveway, and as I turned, I hear like a squawk behind me, like like something squawking at me. I turned around, and this freaking owl came straight at me. out of nowhere. I was like, what the hell, And I like kind of like moved out of the way, and it was like trying to like come back around, and I ran inside the house, and I was like waiting. I waited like for half an hour, and finally I like went back outside, and I looked around, and I was all determined to shoot the owl because I was like, no, screw that, man,
Right.
whatever. But I didn't find it, so I went around and I went to see if the pigeon was there, and there was blood and there was feathers, but there was no pigeon.
Mm.
And I was like, what the hell did I just experience? Was it like also a shapeshifter? Did I like do something I shouldn't have done?
Right.
Um, all that stuff. And then also, growing up after I got out of high school, I had a lot of friends that were into the occult, a lot of friends that were into Carlos Castañeda, and I started kind of studying that type of stuff, and opening more doors, and it just went on and on, man. Like the stories I have are just a bunch
Yeah.
of craziness that I did up. No, to me, it's like a bunch of idiocies that I that I did, but it did build like this I don't know, this healthy respect for the occult later on in
Yeah.
my life.
No, yeah, there's definitely an awareness that there's something else out there. There's a supernatural aspect to life that a lot of people don't see or just aren't aware of because of everyday life. And it's always interesting to explore that through writing.
Yes, definitely. I mean, how else can we get that out there rather than talking about it, or
Yeah,
writing it out?
yeah. So let's get back to writing a little bit. How do you define a good story? What's a good story?
If it leaves an impression, I think, like, if I can talk about it years later and be like,
Mm.
yeah, I remember that book or I remember that story, that's very important to me. I want to leave you with something, knowledge, entertainment, whatever it may be, but I'd like you to come back and read it, because that's what I like to do. I like to go back and read like my favorite novels, my favorite stories all the
Mm.
time. Something that's just like whatever, like most of the books that are out there now as far as comics are concerned, they don't have that impression on me anymore. And I always end up going back to like the stuff that I grew up on, because those were well crafted stories, and it seemed like the writer actually cared about what he was writing about and did his research and stuff like that. So I appreciate that in a good story.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what makes a good first issue story?
I subscribe to the belief that if you can't hook the reader in like the first 6 pages of a comic or in the first paragraph of a novel, then
Yeah,
you're not gonna do it. It's not gonna happen. And if you really love what you do, then you'll be able to do that, no problem. But it is difficult. It's very, very difficult.
no, and that's a good point. Let's drill down a little further. So what makes a good hook?
Man, that's a good question. Like, what makes a good hook? Like, to me, something not so much unique, but something not. I don't want to say like a spin on anything. I just want to say something like original, and it's really difficult to do that nowadays because everyone seems to compare it to something else. You know, like what was it that I heard the comparison? Oh man, I can't remember what it was. Like when I was writing the Cryptidnals, I was trying to make sure that it wasn't compared to anything.
Mm.
That it wasn't like, oh, it's like this, or it's
Right,
like that. It had to be wholly its own thing. It had aspects of stuff that I loved growing up, but I wanted it to be its own thing. Kind of like Stranger Things. Stranger Things is its own thing, but it has all these
yeah,
aspects of, all these 80 movies and the music and this and that it can draw from, which is cool. But
right,
when you start like comparing it to something else, like, yeah, it's like Die Hard, but with like zombies.
right,
What? Like, it sounds interesting, but what are you gonna do with that? What's gonna happen? But if you say like, yeah, it's monsters fighting monsters, but it's not your typical. It's cryptids fighting tulpas. Like, what the hell is a tulpa? Immediately, you're like, what is that? That's something new. So that's something that I look for in a hook, something that hasn't happened. Then of course the elevator pitch, you know,
right.
hook me in one sentence. It's like, oh, cryptids fighting tulpas, to prevent the destruction of the world. What is
That's
that?
that's that's a good hook. That's good.
Yeah,
Good pitch.
I always want to like, because I really wanted to submit like some of the stuff that I've written to like publishers, like Image, because everybody wants to do that. It was all a dream. I used to read Word magazine. Nice. Biggie says nice.
Yeah.
I wanted to submit to like major publishers, and I
Yeah.
studied like I went down the research path and started studying like all these guys that had submitted that had successful pitches like to Image or to Marvel, well more to Image, some the indie books. And I was like, man, you really have to make sure that every word counts, every
Right.
single word. Don't use throwaway words, and make it as tight as possible. And that's something that's very important to me too. Like, don't waste words. Don't
Mm.
don't. What was Brian saying last time? Don't tell me, show me. You
Right.
know, and that's something that's very difficult, I think, for a writer to grasp sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's really interesting. What makes a good elevator pitch? What are the ingredients? Like, what does the listener need to know about the story within that one sentence or 3 sentence pitch?
You need to present. I think you need to present the characters, the was it the problem, and kind of leave it like a cliffhanger. Like, well, you want to know what happens? Kind of like that.
Right.
I always kind of compare it also to like when you tell somebody about a movie. Like, oh man, you got to watch this movie. Like, we watched Barbarian recently, and people were asking me like, well, what did you think? What was it about? And I'm like, I don't want to ruin it for you, but I'll tell you this much: like, you go in expecting one thing, and then it goes sideways, man, and you don't even know where you're going. I don't know if you've seen Barbarian or not.
I haven't seen it, but I've
No,
heard about it.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
like my wife and I went to go watch it, and it's exactly what happened. Like, we went in
Yeah.
thinking one thing, and it builds up a certain way, and then it just goes sideways, and we're like, what? And once you're in, you're in. Like, wow, okay, let's go. Let's see where this leads. I think
Yeah.
that's very important in an elevator pitch, but you got to do that. Like, what did they say? I think it's like 13 or 14 words or something like that, or
Mm.
a sentence, something
Yeah.
like that.
No, that's cool. Um, if you were to talk to like an aspiring writer, what advice would you give them?
Man, like what age? What age are we
Um,
talking about?
just anybody who wants to get into writing, I guess.
Anyone that wants to get into writing, I always tell
Yeah.
them to do research, to not neglect on the research, because people will call you out, especially if you're writing something that you don't know about, and that's very important. Write what you know. You know, it's difficult for like a 13-year-old to write, a novel about, the Vietnam War, because I don't think you've ever read stuff about it or experienced it or even know anyone that might have been to war and stuff
I'm
like that.
28.
28.
Yeah.
If you're 28 and you want to write, read as much as possible. Read
Right.
everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Like shampoo bottles when you're on the toilet. The ingredients of what goes into chips. Just knowledge in general is very, very important to an aspiring writer, I think, because that story can come from anywhere. You can make up anything, and it can be wholly original if you know stuff in general. I know
Right.
things. I drink and I know things. There you go.
That's your life.
Also, if you're young, and I tell this also to artists, and I think this is very, very important, man, because a lot of kids, I want to say kids, man, but a lot of like teenagers, like when you hit high school, use your resources as much as
Yeah.
possible because they are free. Because once you, and I tell this to my son too, like as soon as you hit the real world, man, you have to pay for everything, pencils, paper, anything and everything. You have to pay for it. But when you're in high school, it's all there. You can do computers, you can do editing, you can shoot film. They'll lend you the freaking equipment, paper, pencil, even art, stuff like that. Use your resources to their full potential. Do not like let that just pass you by, because in high school we did that. We used our resources, but we didn't use them to our full potential. We had
Yeah.
access to our art class in high school. We could go in there whenever we wanted. Teacher was completely cool with it, and we used what we had there. But we used it more for, how can I put it, like we used it more for recreational use than we used it
Yeah.
to actually do something with it. Like, we could have done comics in high school if we had gotten our stuff together early.
Right.
And that's something that's very important to me. Like, if you're coming up, like, use your resources, especially in high school.
Yeah. No, definitely. So talk to us about Cryptidnals. What's the story about? I know you got a campaign going. Go ahead
Yes,
and
sir.
plug that.
Right.
Go ahead and plug it, man. Go for it.
Right now we're on Kickstarter and on Indiegogo. I'm pushing more the Kickstarter one, of course, because we want to get to a certain goal. But the Cryptidnals is, or Cryptidnals, however you want to say it, there's no wrong way. Um, is about monsters fighting monsters. Cryptids that we love. Like Bigfoot, La Llorona, the Man Dog, which is like a El Paso original. All these guys are coming together to fight tulpas, and tulpas are the new monsters that are emerging now. Even though in my story they're rooted in something very ancient, they're the new monsters that people are believing in. And to me, tulpas are very, very frightening because they're very, very real, even if we don't want to admit it. The best example of that is the Slender Man. A
Mm.
Slender Man was built out of belief. Someone wrote that online, and people
Right.
believed in it enough that these girls decided, yeah, you know what? Let's kill our friend, and the Slender Man will take us to wherever we want to go. And it caused like all this madre, like
Yeah.
people were believing in it. Stuff is showing up online now. People are seeing like rakes, the black-eyed kids that originated in Tulsa. Was it in Tulsa? I think it was no, no, no,
Was it
Abilene.
Tulsa? I don't know.
No, yeah, it was in Abilene. They originated there. People, a reporter in the '90s started witnessing these black-eyed kids, and that also
Yeah.
became like an internet phenomenon. People were writing about that. Jeff the Killer, all this stuff. Those things are the new monsters that are slowly taking over our reality, even though we don't want to
Mm.
admit it. And these cryptids that have been around forever, that no one believes in, they're like, you know what? I think we better put a stop to this because these things are trying to destroy the world. We're not. We live here. We love here.
Right.
But these things, they actually want to destroy the world for
Yeah.
some reason. And that's where the story takes place. It takes place in the shadows, in the in between, and the stuff that you don't see. But
Mm.
it's rooted. It's hard for me to say this because, of course, people will be like, "What?" It's rooted in reality to an extent. Some of these places do exist. The Cryptidnals live in Nightmare Hall. Nightmare Hall does exist. It's in Dulce, New Mexico. It's Sandia Plateau. The U.S. government had a secret base in there where they had alien greys doing experiments on humans, and you can
Mm.
look this up. You can go online, you can go down the rabbit hole. Type in Nightmare Hall, type in Sandia Plateau, Dulce, New Mexico, and you'll see all the stuff that happened in the '70s. And I think that's where it started with the Cryptidnals too. Like this actually happened. Like what the hell happened? These aliens were fighting military personnel. Soldiers were getting disintegrated by alien ray beams. How did that happen? So that started like writing itself. Basically, I
Yeah.
took that happening and built a story around it and built like this whole world around it. And I tried to flesh out each character to a point where if they were to be in their own book, they could carry their own book. Each character
Mm.
is fleshed out to that point, and everybody seems to like the story, like where it went or how it went down. I guess you could say.
Yeah. That's awesome. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem, man. Are there any questions I didn't ask you about writing that I should have asked you?
I want to know about your process, man. Like I've been talking all this time. Like I'm always curious as to how other writers approach stuff and
Well,
what they like to write. Like what is your go-to genre? Like what do you write about?
I do like to write horror, but I don't. The place where I hit it from is not to scare so much as to cause wonder, I guess. Because when I was a kid,
Hmm.
like one of the first books I ever read from a library was about the Bermuda Triangle and some other
Wow.
weird stuff going on. And of course, and then I told you, growing up
Hmm.
in South Texas, I experienced a lot of weird stuff. And so for me, it's more about curiosity and causing curiosity. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of where I hit like the horror from. It's not really about blood and guts and trying to scare people so much as just trying to cause wonder. Like, what if this is out there? That type
See,
of thing.
that's interesting to me. Like I think it's the Faust in growing up with the Faust that I always lean towards like the gore or like the
Yeah,
unsettling images and stuff like that. Like I can never write a story without it like having something happen where it's like, oh God, what the hell, and that stays
yeah,
with you. I
yeah.
remember what I was talking to about that on a stream the other day about like some of the new horror is very like whatever, very mundane and takes a lot to impress
Mm,
hardcore like horror fans or gore fans or whatever, gore hounds.
right.
Hereditary for some reason that always sticks in my head because of the imagery. some of the stuff that happens in there is so disturbing that it stays with you afterwards. And I
Mm.
always think like, well, I think that's good horror, something that stays with you and disturbing, like The Exorcist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Um, and when you write, like, how do you go about it? Like, do you flesh out the characters first and then you go into your story, or do you have like a story and then you just kind of put characters into it?
Yeah, a lot of what I write's like short stories, like 10, 12 pages long. So it's not like a whole lot of character development. It's more about the premise of the story. And then from there, I do kind of try and develop the character a little bit. But again, it's such a short story that there's not a whole lot of time for character development.
I see. And this is like comic book, or is it like actual like novel stuff?
Yeah, it's a comic book. I did one last year. It's called Tricks and Treats. I'll show you the cover here.
Oh, okay, cool.
Or there
Oh,
you go.
awesome. How
Yeah,
did I miss this?
it's an anthology series.
Mm.
I'll show you a couple of pages here.
How many pages is that? That's a big book. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. It's like
that's
I want to
cool.
say it's like 90 pages or so.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a Bigfoot story in there.
Yeah. Good old Bigfoot.
Yeah.
What's your take on Bigfoot? What is he? What I mean, I always ask everybody this question. Like, what do you think Bigfoot is?
Well, and there's different versions of him in the book. There's one where he's like a Native American spirit. The one that I wrote, he's from another planet,
Oh,
basically. And
wow.
he's it's like the Greys use them as a slave, basically, because like our air is toxic, and so the Bigfoot can move around on our planet. And yeah, so that's kind of what he is in this book. And again, it's just short stories, like 12 pages,
Oh,
14
wow.
pages. Yeah.
That's cool. Are you gonna like elaborate more? Like, you're gonna make a bigger story or a bigger book?
On some characters, there's one character in that story that I really liked, and I'm gonna go back to when he was younger and kind of
Mhm.
explore that. But yeah, I mean, it's an anthology series. The point is just to do a short story and just kind of move on.
That's cool. How
Yeah,
how about what is your range as far as short? What do you consider, in other words, a short story? Like, how many pages do you think?
probably the shortest one I worked on was like 8 pages. I want to
Mm.
say, yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that's mine. My go-to also. So between 6 and 8 pages is like the
yeah,
shortest thing, because 1, 2 pages is very, very, very difficult to me.
yeah. No, that is too short. Yeah, I feel like horror and comedy are similar in the sense that you got your premise, your setup, your punchline, and
Yes.
and so you need time to do those three aspects of the story.
I mean, in any horror story, there's always that point where you get where it's so intense that you need a break. You need a
Yeah,
release valve, and comedy fits perfectly in that. And that's why a lot of like horror movies use comedy to kind of like ground you. You
yeah,
know, like, you're like, oh my god, I'm freaking out, and then something comedic happens. Like a lot of stuff when I was growing up that I experienced, immediately I would turn on the TV in order for it to ground me. Hopefully it
yeah,
was something not scary, maybe it was Roseanne, maybe it was something else, but
yeah.
immediately it grounds you. And that's why a lot of people like reach for like the light, or they reach for something that will ground them immediately when they're going through something that's terrifying. And I think
Right,
that's a perfect example of what you're saying. Comedy and horror are pretty much the same thing. The setup, and then the everything in the middle, and then the punchline at the end.
right. No, yeah, definitely. You just end up with a different result. I mean, that's all
Yeah,
it is. You're just
exactly.
you're going for the opposite reaction. Um, Opposite sides of the same coin, I guess.
You could always say like, yeah, yeah, I killed them, or I
All
really
right,
did
killed
kill
them.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very cool.
But yeah, I got the next one coming out next year.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, that's in process right now.
Nice, very nice, man. And when you write, like, do you have like something already set up, like you know how it's gonna end, or like you do what I do and just go in like, let's go and see what happens.
No, a lot of times I'm thinking about the story before I sit down and write. I'm thinking, and sometimes the story changes so many times in my head, so
Mhm.
that by the time I sit down and write, I feel like all the good stuff's already stuck. Like that's what I'm
Oh,
remembering when I sit down to write.
that's another thing too. You brought up a very good point, the good stuff. Because I've been asked that, like, well, how do you write, the good stuff? And I'm like, well, you got to write all the crap out first in order to get to the good stuff. And I think a lot of writers that are coming up now are afraid to do
Yeah,
that.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it sucks, man, because you have to do that in order to get to the good writing.
Right. No, yeah, definitely. I'll go through like 3 or 4 different iterations of the story in my head before I land on what I'm going to put down on paper. And even then, once it's down on paper, I'm like, I'm going to put this aside for a couple of months and then come back and revisit it and see
Hmm.
what I want to change.
I mean, that's exactly what happened with the Cryptidnals, man. Like, I remember the way that it came about. I A friend of mine that I grew up with, also, during that time that we were doing comics in high school, a few years ago, he had hit some rough times, and he was living with me, and we'd go everywhere together. We'd drive around, whatever. And I remember we had I guess you could call it a game, that we would play as we were driving around, because we were really into comics. We've always been into comics. I think EC
Right.
had some too. Yes, I believe so. I used to have my EC books out. I don't know where I left them, but so we were driving around, and we were always play this game that we would pitch ideas to each other. Like, if you were in the room with Marvel, what would you pitch them? How would you pitch a
Yeah.
Punisher story
Yeah.
to them? Or if you could do anything at all, how would you pitch it? And I remember we're driving, and he's like, "Tell me your craziest idea. Like, pitch to me your craziest idea that you have right now." And I'm like, "Okay, a group of cryptids led by the Loch Ness monster are hired by the U.S. government to go around the world and seek out religious relics." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, and it'll be the Loch Ness monster, it'll be Bigfoot, and then La Llorona, of course, I gotta throw her in there, the
Yeah.
Mothman, all those guys." And the government like sends them out to do this. And I didn't even know that that had already existed in the Secret Saturdays. I don't know if you ever saw that
No, I never did.
cartoon. Yeah, it was on Cartoon Network, the Secret
Huh.
Saturdays, and it kind of is similar to that. But
Huh.
at the time when I told him that, he's like, "That's nuts, man! How would you even do that? How would the Loch Ness monster get around?" And we started like brainstorming all this stuff, and
Right.
that's where the Cryptidnals came from. So
Ah,
originally
cool.
they were supposed to be like this group of cryptids that would go around the world getting into adventures and stealing these artifacts that had some sort of religious significance. And I'm like, "What?" So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really cool, man. I know you've got a TikTok channel too, right?
Yes, I have a TikTok. I call it Cryptid Talk, but it's the Cryptonals on TikTok. We have quite a few people that are following it. I think I have like 11,000 people. I was
Ah,
surprised.
that's crazy, man.
We're not monetized yet, though, so whatever. But it's still fun to do. I've been slacking on it a little bit in the past few months, but I'm starting to get back into the groove. And especially with the Cryptonals on Kickstarter, we're starting to like do some more content for that. But yeah, if you
Yeah.
guys want to follow me on TikTok, or Instagram or anything, just type in Cryptonals and it'll pop everything up. Or 656 Comics, of course, my crew. Um, that that'll take you directly to all our links and everything that we have on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that stuff.
That's awesome,
Only
man.
one that we don't do is Twitch, because I didn't understand how that works. So
Yeah, I haven't touched that yet either. I feel like an old man, but yeah.
I've seen a lot of people, a lot of like our contemporaries, people that are in the indie scene, starting to use TikTok more,
Yeah.
especially like artists. Just draw something, and they like you have the ability to like edit in TikTok to like speed it up or whatever. So if you're
Oh,
drawing
cool.
something, you speed it up and you can post it. And I think like the attention span for a TikTok is like between 20 to 30 seconds. So if
Wow.
you can post a lot of those, like those are the ones that people will stay for. I have
Wow.
this bad habit of posting like these long-winded ones that are like 3 minutes, so I
Yeah.
don't get a lot of views. But
What kind of
those
content do
are
you do
fun.
there?
It's mostly like a lot of cryptid stuff, a lot of paranormal stuff, occult stuff, stuff that I've heard. I kind of narrate it a little bit and tell
Okay.
you like a backstory of it in like 3 minutes. We have I have a few TikToks that I actually captured like on film. I think on there I captured like a shadow person one time outside of my apartments, and also like orbs and stuff like that one
Mm.
time. And I posted those up, but most of it is just me talking about kind of the cryptids that I'm into, or the legends that I'm into, and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, that's really cool, man. I gotta check that out.
Thanks,
I love
sir.
that stuff.
Yeah, man. Once you start going like at night, once you start going down the rabbit hole, you're just there till the morning, man. An hour turns
Yeah.
into 5 hours and stuff.
Yeah. That's crazy, man. Well, hey, man, thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me, man. This was a lot of fun. and I want to have you on the 656 stream too whenever you have a chance, so we can talk more.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
especially like, well, I know you already put your book out, but when you get ready to do the other book, of course,
Yeah,
so we can promote it as much as possible. We indie guys have to stay tight, because that's all we got. We got each other, because
that's
the
true.
mainstream
Yeah,
isn't going to be paying attention to us. So
that's right. Yeah,
exactly. But
definitely.
thank
I'll
you so
hit.
much.
Yeah, no problem, man. It's a pleasure to actually meet you. I know we've chatted a couple of times on YouTube just through comments and stuff, but it's really cool to actually meet you, man. Good talking to
Thank
you.
you so much. Appreciate it, Ben. Thank you so much, and be careful with those duendes, brother, because those things, they'll follow you, man. They'll
Hey,
follow you.
they're in Texas, man.
They're in Texas,
I left them in Texas. I'm in Oklahoma now.
and then they got little feet, so they'll take forever to get to
That's right,
Oklahoma.
man. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.